Hello, everyone. 8th of April 2022, and I am honored to present Kiersten Latham from Michigan State University. And she'll be presenting actually her book, which will be published next year, excerpts from her book, which will be published next year. But before that, I would like to actually introduce what Kiersten is doing on museum studies. She has a BA from University of Michigan, anthropology, and she had a master's in historical administration and museum studies in University of Kansas. And in 2009, she had a PhD in library information management in Emporia State University. And she's very enthusiastic about museum studies and also developing information and also interest in museum visits for visitors and enjoying actually and learning experience in museums. So I will let Kiersten now to present her lecture to us. The screen is yours. It's all yours.
Oh, it says host
Thank
disabled screen sharing. Okay. There's always something. Oh, good. Okay, now it's going to work. Wonderful. Okay, let's see. So this is a PDF, so I apologize. It's got other things in it, but okay, can you see it? The slide?
Yes, it's perfect. Thank you.
And you can hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Well, thank you so much for having me and for being interested in having me come talk to you. This is such a privilege. And so what I'm going to talk about today is what I'm calling Flourishing Museums. It's actually the title of a book that I'm in process of working on. And so I'm going to keep it to that. But first, I want to just tell you just a little bit about me so you can get a context for where I'm coming from in cultural organizations and in academia. I have actually been working for over 30 years in museums and museum studies. I started when I was 2, just kidding. I started when I was 18, actually, working in museums. And so I've seen a lot of museums over the years and a lot of different kinds of museums. I'm currently a professor of museum studies and arts management at Michigan State University here in the US. And I've done a lot of research on human relationship with objects, which is what a lot of people know me for. I've also done work on foundations of museums. I've written a textbook on that. And then my most recent adventure is positive museology, which is what I'm talking about today. So if you don't know what that is, that's okay. I'll tell you about it. So why a flourishing museum, and what is flourishing? About 4 years ago now, in 2017, I was in Croatia, Zadar, Croatia, on a Fulbright. And if you've ever been to Zadar, you know it's on the Adriatic, or maybe you don't have to be there to know that. Beautiful sea. And so every morning I would go run by the sea. It was the way I started my day. And while I was doing that, I would listen to a book on tape kind of thing. One of those books was Flourish by Martin Seligman. And as I listened to this book, it's a book about positive psychology and looking at the good things in life and what we can do to enable flourishing in people, flourishing being helping people to grow and to be the best they can. So as I listened to this, I asked, why aren't museums doing this? He kept talking about all these aspects of positive psychology and all this research pointing to how we can enable people to flourish, how we could have an attitude for flourishing. And And you just didn't really hear it talked about that way in any kind of formal context in museums. And so right then and there, I thought, okay, I'm doing this. Why not a positive museology? We have now have a lot of positive disciplines. We have positive organizational science. We have positive psychology, like I mentioned, positive journalism, positive teaching, education. I mean, it's positive tourism, latest one. So why not positive museology? So as I was thinking about this, I realized that the work that I've been doing myself as a researcher has actually been in this positive realm the whole time, but I just hadn't put it together, which is sort of what I think the literature in museums is like as well. I worked on flow, I've worked on growth, appreciation. These are all things I've been very interested in looking through these lenses for museums. So in 2008, when I returned from Croatia, I began to develop this idea of a positive museology. I didn't know what it was. I honestly didn't know what that was, but I was going to do it. It's kind of a big thing to take on because there's a lot of research out there. And so what I did was I started just in the form of blogs. I've written a couple of blog posts just on things I was learning as I went, concepts that were coming up, and saying, hey, why not museums? And around that time, I also decided to apply to put a research proposal in for a book on positive museology. It did not succeed. I did not do well with that. But I didn't want to give up because I did have one good review that really thought it was important to do. So this began a long and winding path to where we are now. Many hits and misses, many rejections along the way, suspicions along the way, and finally to this book that I am now doing called Flourishing Museums Toward a Positive Museology. So that's what we're going to really focus on today, is what that looks like. And in talking about what that book looks like and how it's structured, you'll learn more about what a flourishing museum might be and the components of that, and why even do I want to do this. So I'm actually going to diminish there we go. You have to manage all these things on your screen. So the book is in progress now. It's due to publish in May of 2023. Was actually accepted last fall, which is a very long period to write a book, but you'll see in a moment why we wanted a long period. One of the things that I realized in that first book proposal that I didn't succeed at was I tried to go at it by myself. As a single author, trying to put forth a theory by myself. And that wasn't right. That just didn't feel right. It didn't work out right. The reviewers knew this. So I invited Brenda Cowan. I don't know if anyone knows of her, but she's written a really amazing book recently called Museums, Health and Healing. And it's about objects and the relationship, people's relationship with objects and their role in healing. So she's my co-editor now, and that was a really good move. She's a tremendous person and has been significant in helping me to develop the next proposal. We're working together on this. So what we did was we structured the book using this framework, and you're going to hear a lot about the framework today. And actually, I should have corrected this, because up here it says 23 authors, but we have I was actually wrong about that. We have 32 writers with 26 chapters. So somehow it grew. I don't know what happened. And they're divided into these 6 intentions. So the book is structured with these 6 intentions. It's overarching. There's going to be an introduction to the framework and kind of digging into the evidence-based research around that. And then each of the 6 intentions has me writing a synthesis of the current literature. And then each author provides what we call illustrative examples, which could mean anything. It could mean something they've learned in practice. It could be something that's reflective. It could be a how-to. We let them decide that, but as long as it was within these intentions, which you will see in a moment. It's not letting me move forward. Okay, hold on a second. There we go. All right, so the framework, I felt like the best way to get a handle on how to become a flourishing museum or how to work towards flourishing museums in a general way is to have a framework. I love frameworks. I've written other frameworks. I realize now, looking back on my career, that I have a little bit of an obsession with creating models, but I find them useful, and they help me to organize. And so the entire book is built around this idea of this framework. What's important to note about the framework is it's dynamic. It is, I purposely want it to be ever changing. I want the book to be, while the book is going to be sort of cemented in time, here's the framework, here's the way it's structured, here's what it says. I want it to develop and change. And I want it to do that based on what's happening in the world. I want people, I'm hoping, my hope is that the framework will grow, develop, change, and alter based on people knowing more about positive museology. So the audience for this is a bit tricky. I think that ultimately I'm writing this book for museum professionals to give them some kind of inspiration, some sort of way, a different lens, an alternate lens, a lens that gives another layer to the way that their current lens works to do museum work and to contribute to the world. It's kind of big. So the framework is this device, and it is ever changing. And so I'm going to go into details about the framework here for you. So first of all, it starts out with a holistic model. In 2014, you think I would know the year of my book, John Simmons and I wrote a textbook, and in it we introduced this notion of the holistic model of museums, where we said that we are looking at museums as ecosystems. And there's the inner museum, which is kind of this maybe more hidden from view aspect, what people do behind the scenes, the administration, the curators might do research behind the scenes, a lot of the collections management, planning, all these sorts of things. The outer museum, which is the more public, the aspect that most people see, know, talk about. You see these analogies in in movies and that sort of thing. That's the outer museum. And then this museum, which is inner and outer, sits inside of an external system. So many systems, right? We could have cultural systems. We could have our local municipal systems. We could have political movements as systems. And so it acknowledges this model that's really important here. And you'll see when we go into this why. So the framework is 3 perspectives, 3 practices, and 6 intentions. The intentions I mentioned earlier, that's what the authors are going to be writing on and how the book is structured. The perspectives and the practices are a little bit different. Even though these all work together, the perspectives acknowledge that when we're in a museum, or if we're dealing with museums, that we're always at every minute ourselves, but then we're also relating and we also exist in a system. So the 3 perspectives are going to look at these different intentions through sort of from the different angle, these different perspectives from the self, from myself as a person, and then from the relation, meaning relation with people, relation with objects, just whatever interactions there are, and then with systems, so organizational kinds of things. 3 practices, balancing, orienting, and inquiring. These are the doing. These are the things that we do, and they're constant, and they are reminders to intentionally bring things up and think about them as we move forward with our work. And then the intentions, courage, care, transformation, optimism, gratitude, and delight, are not mutually exclusive, and they're also not all there can be. This is derived from the work that I've done in positive museology, in positive psychology, and positive organizational scholarship, pulling this enormous amount of evidence-based research together. And really, at one point, I just had to decide which aspects, because there's so much. And this is why I want this model to be dynamic, because this isn't the end. This isn't all of it. This was a way to get this book out there and start to talk about it. It was the beginning. All right, so another way to look at it, for myself, I just told you I love frameworks and I love models. And so for me, I needed a visual to understand this model. This isn't quite right, but some of you who are very visual might like this a little bit better. It's, hold on a second. There we go. You might like this picture a little bit better. It's one of the things that I came up with just kind of anecdotally, because I don't know how this is going to fit into the book, is that the purpose of museums is love. I actually have had this aha moment where I think that answers everything. But that's the reason for the heart. The heart kind of represents love. And then you can see the three perspectives: self, relation, and system that we look through. And then the 6 intentions sort of around there: courage, care, transformation, optimism, gratitude, and delight, all inside the museum, which sits inside the world, and the actions, the dynamic things that we're constantly working on, orienting, inquiring, and balancing around it. Okay, for some reason it keeps not wanting me to do this. Okay, so let me just tell you a little bit more about the 3 perspectives. The self refers to the fact that we are all individuals, that each person is unique, but it also acknowledges that we need to focus on the whole person. Very often, at least in US museums, we have focused quite a lot on the mental, the intellectual aspects of our visitors and our workers. But the idea here is to expand that and acknowledge that people are whole people. They are physical beings. Their bodies are important. The intellectual is important, but so is the emotional and the spiritual. It also acknowledges that introspection is an aspect of being a person, that there is always something kind of going on and people can introspect and think about things. Relation acknowledges that the self is always in relation to something else. And it might not just be a person or people, it might be objects. And that a person in a gallery, in some kind of exhibition space, might have a relationship with an object or a space itself, or even traditions within that. So that's relations, kind of an expansive concept, and it doesn't necessarily mean just people, but it certainly includes that. And then system, like I mentioned earlier, museums are ecosystems, treated as ecosystems within other systems. And this notion of systems thinking is used quite a lot in this model and in this book. So the 3 practices, when I first started to develop the framework, all I had was the lenses, the 3 perspectives, and the intentions, and something was missing. It didn't feel right. It felt, where's the action? And I thought, what is the action I want to happen in this? So I've boiled it down into these 3 practices of balancing, orienting, and inquiring. I'm not sure this is right. We'll see. I want people to apply it. I want to apply it to see if it works. But for now, this is where we are. And I should tell you too, that I'm still writing on this. I'm not quite there with this. And part of that is because there's so much research. And if you think about it, these 3 topics, how do you even narrow down research on balancing? It's enormous. So I'm just, so you know, it's sort of in process. Balancing is kind of a harmonious arrangement. It's when you look up definitions of balancing, they're kind of dissatisfying. So I'm trying to put together what we all talk about in terms of balance. Having balance. You, as a person, you want to have balance. If you have this exhibit, you want to have balance. And so what I'm proposing is that balance includes this notion of wholeness. So considering parts and whole, not just parts, but their parts and whole and their relationship to each other. Aligning I get from many years of yoga practice. And and those of you who do yoga practice probably know that alignment is really important. In yoga, it's where the body needs to be positioned in each pose in order to obtain maximum benefit. And this maximum benefit in these poses increases strength, increases flexibility. You don't want to cause pain. You want to avoid injury. So this proper alignment increases flow. It increases circulation, inner space, brings a balanced flow of energy through you. And I love this concept. I mean, from the moment that I was in yoga for the first time many years ago, and I mean a body practice, I should say, and later an inner practice, I thought there's something to this alignment thing. And I thought about it in terms of the museum as, you think this consideration of all the parts of the museum, for instance, body in yoga, departments in museums, how they relate to each other, position in yoga, communication in museums, to help open up good health, good circulation in yoga, strength, and flourishing in museums. So alignment. Informational balance comes from information science, one of my fields. And it's a concept that is derived from the slow movement. You may have heard of the slow movement. I think a lot of people are familiar with this when it comes to food, the slow food movement, but it's really filled a lot of other areas. And what it's acknowledging is balancing content, really, informational balance. So it's saying, we have to look at all different kinds of content and make balanced choices for the informational situation. We don't just necessarily for each topic would necessarily do the exact same thing, because there might be different needs in there. A lot of museums, again, this might be a US thing, I'm not sure, but to me, they're too fast and too full. And we have a lot of blockbusters, and I go into a museum now and there's so much noise, and it's just too much for me. So I'm interested in this idea of informational balance to facilitate a breathing space between the information and the interaction with it. All right, orienting. I'm not exactly convinced that this is the best term for it, but we're going to go with it here for now. And this is really, for me, it's about reframing, stepping back, pausing to consider, repositioning your own perspective, let's say as a museum worker, in a positive light. And it is important that it's in a positive light. And there's a lot of research for that behind that I go into in the book. This involves a growth mindset. A growth mindset refers to, versus a fixed mindset, refers to continual learning, continual growth, whereas a fixed mindset is static and unchangeable. Openness, again, I chose this word, but really difficult to research and put together. But basically what I've come to is it's about orienting oneself to be open to ideas, change, difference, and to watch one's own assumptions, judgments. And that's what I mean by openness. It's much more complex than that. But impermanence, again, another thing that I derive from many spiritual traditions, but also from science too. Quantum physics is a proponent of impermanence in contemporary neuroscience research as well. Basically talking about all things are understood as constantly changing, that there is nothing in the universe that is ever the same. And then the final one in orienting, overcoming negativity bias. I don't have a really, I'm trying to think of a different term for that in particular, because I kind of don't want to call it exactly what it is. But if you are familiar with some of the neuroscience research on the human brain, one of the things that we are prone to is negativity. And it comes from our evolutionary past, where we are constantly on the alert looking for the bad guys out there and protecting ourselves. And so if we don't make a choice to look for the positive, we tend to go towards the negative. And so this intentional practice to make the choice for the positive is part of orienting. Inquiring, whoops, don't need to do that. Inquiring is probably the one that many of us are very familiar with because it's about curiosity. This is an ongoing interest in finding out more, inquiring, this open-ended, ongoing interest, curiosity, right? Asking questions, wondering about things. We have curiosity. We should have them built into our museums for our visitors, but we should also, as museum professionals, be curious and have that be part of our job. Generativity is a really interesting concept that I particularly love. And so what this refers to is the power to produce useful new ideas that provoke new actions. Really key and important. It's very subtle, but I think it's something we need to do more of in museums and other cultural organizations. And then listening. We do a lot of telling in museums. We do a lot of telling, don't we? But do we listen? So listening, actively listening, both to our museum professional workers, or not even professionals, just any of our museum workers, and our visitors, and the world out there, right, which we interact with because we sit within that system. This is a skill and takes practice. Listening is a skill. So these are the practices. These have taken me 3 months to just get a draft of 3,000 words to write about. It's taken me quite a long time. Okay, so to the intentions. Hopefully my furnace just kicked on. Hopefully you can hear me okay. So the 6 intentions are where the book is structured around these. So each of these 6 intentions, courage, care, transformation, optimism, gratitude, and delight, each have 3, 4, 5 authors writing in the context of those things. So what happens in the book is I will write about the research on courage, the current research, mostly evidence-based, draw from museum studies and what's been written there, which in some cases is a lot, but then sometimes not so much. And I synthesize that and I open the chapter or the section with that, and then the authors write about their perspective. So it's very diverse what people are writing about. There's like no way that I can just say and all the authors in courage are writing about blah, because they're just so different. It's really fascinating, but they're all writing about courage. So our hope with this book is to offer an alternative approach to museum practice. And maybe not just an alternative approach, but an approach that can be added to other approaches. Like I don't necessarily want to position it as either or, but just something to get people thinking about other ways of seeing, doing, and understanding museums. And it may be to stimulate a little research on it. We do need that. I believe that our hope is to grow our understanding of what it means to flourish in museums. And as you know, as I've mentioned, to further develop a positive museology. And ultimately to show the important role of museums in bettering people's lives. That's my ultimate wish, is that we can really help enable this. I mean, we have these tremendous institutions that have the capacity to do this. And how do we do that? Well, we can't really do that if we don't intentionally do it. Really, and frankly, I think that's the gist of it. So that's, in a nutshell, that's the book. And I'm happy to answer questions and anything you have, any comments. I would love comments too, because this is in process. And so I'm very happy to get your feedback on it. It would be really helpful.
Thank you, Kiersten. Can I quickly summarize in Turkish to my students in case they missed some of your...
Yeah, of course.
Müze deneyimi olduğunu söylüyor ve 30 yıldır da müzelerde çalışıyor. Ve aslında onun yaklaşımı çok farklı ve bu pozitif müzecilik düşüncesini Zadar, Courage ya da Fulbright aldığı zaman dinlediği bir kitap, yani tape'den dinlediği bir kitap üzerine aslında geliştirmiş. Neden diyor mesela pozitif psikoloji ve işte habercilik ya da gazetecilik var ve neden müzecilik üzerine böyle bir şey olmasın? 2008 yılında da bunu geliştiriyor. Ve şu anda da 2023'te çıkacak kitabı Brenda Cohen'la birlikte sizinle paylaştığı detaylarıyla aslında bize ve kendisi şöyle söylüyor aslında, ben her zaman diyor bir hani plan üzerine giderim ama şöyle bir şeyi fark ediyoruz aslında. Kiersten Latham'ın daha farklı bakış açısı aslında müze deneyiminin insan bazında çok önemli olduğunu ve insanın aslında müzeyle bağlantısı konusunu çok irdelediği için, aslında yeni model geliştirdiği için bu konuda buna aslında holistik model diyor. Bu çok değerli ve önemli. John Simmons da bu konuda bir kitap yazmışlar ve kendisi aslında bir müzenin dış sistemi bir de iç sistemi olduğunu söylüyor. Ve onun tabii interdisipliner eğitimi hem lisansta antropoloji okuması, sonra master'da aslında enstitülerle de geliştirilen bir program yapması ve en sonunda da doktorasını aslında kütüphanecilik ve dokümantasyon üzerine yapması ve yayınlarına da baktığımız zaman aslında müze objesinin bir doküman olduğunu hep söyler ve onun geliştirdiği Buckland'dan ve onun geliştirdiği sistem, yani 1990'lardan sonra aslında Kiersten Latham çok daha yeni şeyler geliştiriyor ve aslında o çok güzel bazı sunular yaptı size. Şöyle, mesela kendi yaşam deneyimlerini müzeciliğe koyuyor. Mesela insanı baz alan ve insanın müzeyle ilişkisi belli bir sistemin içinde mutlaka bir denge olması, bir oryantasyon olması ve bütün aslında müze davranışında niyetin çok önemli olduğunu ve hoş vakit geçirmesi gereken yerler olduğunu söylüyor bize. Dolayısıyla onun için her şey denge ve bunu yoga deneyimine de biraz bağladı kendisini. Ve insanların aslında müzeye gittikleri zaman bir iç gözlemleri olduğunu söyledi bize ve bu iç gözleme bağlı olarak da insanların geliştirdiği fiziksel bir ve kendi beyinleriyle geliştirdikleri bir duygunun ortaya çıktığını söyledi bize. Unutmadan bir de müzenin bir ekosistem olduğunu söyledi ve düşünsel bir deneyimle gelişen, aslında bu çok önemli ve tümü düşünmemiz gerekiyor dedi ve çok güzel bir şey söyledi. Mesela Impermanence'da hani kısa süreli deneyimde insanların aslında bunun gelişmesi gerektiğini söyledi müzelerde. Yani bu halihazırda var olan sistemin kabul edilmemesi gerektiğini söyledi. Onun dışında da insan beyninin aslında bir mekana girdiği zaman negatifleri okuduğunu ve aslında buna bağlı olarak da bunun elimine edilmesiyle ilgili şeyler söyledi. İyi bir dinleyici olmanın üretkenlikte çok önemli olduğunu ve merakla yola çıkılan bir müzeciliğin oldukça önemli olduğunu söyledi. Onun için aslında her şey belki courage, yani cesaret ve onun, yani kitapta özellikle odaklandığı konu bu ve dönüşüm çok önemli ve gratitude çok önemli tabii. Minnetkarlık aslında bu. Yani müzeye gittiğiniz zaman o müzede yaşadığınız deneyimin sizin üzerinizde yarattığı etkisi ve optimistik bir tavırla yaklaşmak ve onun bize aslında bu şekilde kitabını özetlediğini söyleyebiliriz. Şimdi de soruları. sorry, it was a very fast translation.
That
I
is so
took some notes.
impressive. I'm so impressed that you can remember that much.
Yes. So I will ask our guests and students to contribute to your actually great ideas, and they have also experiences, museum experiences. Ceren, would you like to ask a question to Kiersten?
Yes, if possible. Thank you. Okay, can you hear me, Ms. Latham? Okay, that was really impressive, and I was really impressed because 2 months ago, I just read something about the positive museology from your writings, from the blog. So that was a really great appreciation for me to meet you, first of all. Thank you for this. I'd like to ask you a question, because I was expecting this approach, that your approach especially is related to mindful museum approach or the therapeutic museum approach. That was really impressive. As everyone knows that the pandemic especially made us to rethink the museums and science centers. They are the resources of hope, because we understood it, and everyone who are especially the audience for this presentation most probably think the same thing. I think they are the resources of hope. And what about the especially the micro museums? What do you think? Do you think the alternative museum types, as children's museums, toy museums, and we are also working for Ankara University Toy Museum anyway, eco museums, maybe the village museums or neighborhood museums? I can of course count many things, but I'm not doing at the moment. I think, do you think that they are a kind of places, or the institutions are also applying the positive museology approach? This is the first question. And I have another question, and then I'm just closing this conversation. Have you had a chance to look at the Turkish museums, at least their websites or social media accounts? We are just trying to do our best about just maybe performing as a positive museums. And I think, have you ever realized a sample of positive museology, or maybe you can do this in the future, because your approach is especially affecting all the museums in Turkey also. Thank you so much.
Wow, lovely, great questions. Thank you. So the first question was very complex, but I think what you were asking was, do I think that all these different kinds of museums can also be a part of this? So two things that I thought of immediately from that. One is that my definition of museums is very broad. I don't have a tight definition. To me, anyone with musealized interactions is a museum. So you could have somebody in a shopping center with an exhibition that they intend to be about meaning making, all the way to science centers, living history. I even think libraries I would put in there. I would put archives in there. I think they're all meaning making institutions. And so they all absolutely, they have interactions, people have interactions with objects, and that's really the core of what it is that we do. So the other thing that I didn't mention is that we had to make a decision to make this book about museums, but I really would have rather it was about cultural organizations. I feel like it was, I'm never just separating museums out, because as you can see, I have a systems approach. I put them in as parts of ecosystems. So saying museums can do this, but not talking about libraries is weird to me. So we do actually have a lot of authors in the book who are not museum people. We've got an archivist, we've got a vendor, a sales, like a person who sells to museums, exhibition work. We've got people in all different kinds of museums or museal institutions. We've got people in every aspect of their career, from very early into their career to people that you've probably heard of, like John Falk, probably Lois Silverman, Randy Korn, all these people, Leslie Bedford, all people who are have been in the field for 40 or more years. So yeah, my long answer then is yes, they of course can benefit. I think everyone can benefit from this. And so yesterday, actually, I teach a leadership and cultural organizations course, and I presented this to my class yesterday to get their feedback. And that class is made of people who are not anywhere even involved in cultural organizations. I have someone who's in political science. I have someone who's in marketing, just general marketing in film. He's really interested in that. And they all were saying, oh, I can see how this applies to my own universe. And yeah, because it's really ultimately that's what it's doing, because it's drawing from something that's already out there that's talking about it as a universal, from positive psychology and positive organizational scholarship. So what's different in the book is that it's just putting it together. It's not new. None of it's new. It's just putting it together in a way that's digestible and can spark change. Because really, I know what museum work is like here in this country, and it's people are constantly busy, they're overworked, there's never enough time, they can't explore, which is ironic because they're in museums, and they don't have time to be doing all this work. So I'm doing it for them. That's my goal here. So the other question about Turkish museums, no, I haven't, and I need to. And so you can help me point me to that. I absolutely want to know and want to watch and want to see. One of the people that's in my book, you probably know, Elif Gökçedem. Yeah, did I say that right? So Elif and I, she's one of my favorite people on earth. She's the one who's written a lot of books on empathy in museums, and she's Turkish. And I invited her to be in the book, and it just blossomed into this amazing relationship. And she and I are writing a chapter in the book together, called Creating the Heart Space Through Museums. And it's about love as the purpose of museums. So I do know someone who, knows Turkish museums. I just haven't watched them myself, but I'm thinking now that you say that, I'm thinking, well, there's a reason probably that she's thinking about this, because if she's seeing things happen in Turkish museums, surely that's why she's so driven and inspired by it. So I would love it if you would point me to some things to watch. That would be really helpful. This is a global book. So it's Routledge is the publisher, and they were adamant that we had someone from every continent. That was literally one of the things they required. We didn't do well with South America, but we have people from, I know a lot of people in the US, and so that tended to be heavy in the US. But we have people from all over the world, from Japan, from South Africa, keep looking, India. In fact, if you know Purnima Sardana, she is the creator of Museums of Hope in India, which is amazing. If you don't know about this, you should look her up. We have England, Sweden, Ireland, and more. So it's meant to be a global book, but it's also not meant to say that we've covered everything. This is the start. This is the beginning. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. You already did, because I just checked something today, Ms. Latham. It is from just a report. It's from Center for the Future of Museums. I like them so much, And they are also, for 2022, they are emphasizing the education for all children, livable communities for our elders, mental health for all, emergency responses in the faces of disaster, and right-sizing the world. Most probably the conclusion and the answer is the museum, and we need more possibility and maybe positivity. So thank you for this speech anyway. And I'm also just having some notes to check out all the other people, especially Elif Gökçedem is really successful for how do we can create any kind of empathy in the museums, and she's also really good at the object lessons. I think your approach is being created by you because you're an anthropologist. I think you got the different types of approach and seeing the culture in different sizes, and maybe we need more interdisciplinary works in our museums also in Turkey, and especially all the audiences maybe in the near future would be really grateful to give you some samples from our museums, maybe to put in your book or in your blog or to show it for globally.
I would love that. I think
you.
that getting perspectives from every single corner of the world is only going to be helpful. It's only helpful, and we learn from each other. I learn from you. You learn from me. I mean, this is what it's about.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ceren. Last year, we examined low-income areas of the cities, the museums in the low-income areas. So maybe one of my students would like to ask you a question about how do you see those museums in positive museology? Dilekçim?
Merhaba hocam. Hocam ben Türkçe olarak iletsem sizden rica etsem olur değil mi?
Olur.
Çok akıcı konuşamıyorum
Evet,
çünkü
translate.
özür diliyorum.
Hı hı.
Öncelikle hocam gerçekten çok etkilendim. Son dönemlerde bizlerin de ve sizin yönlendirmenizde aslında müzecilik, müzelerdeki sergileme üzerine bu pozitif yaklaşımlar daha hem ekosistem içerisinde değerlendirilmesi hem de kendi habitatının bütün müze ziyaretçileri için özgür bir alan yaratması konusundaki yönlendirmeleriniz de aslında kendilerinin yapmış olduğu çalışmayla bizlerin de bu alanda doğru adımda olduğunu ve doğru yaklaşımlarda olduğunu bir göstergesi. Benim sormak istediğim şu, acaba ben buradaki bir iki tane notumdan da yola çıkarak, evet bir müze objesi bir doküman. Peki bu doküman hem bilgi sağlayıp hem bilgi aktarıp hem de aynı zamanda müze ziyaretçisiyle olan iletişiminin samimiyetini nasıl sağlayacak? Çünkü bilgi denildiği zaman her zaman böyle itici bir bariyer, daha doğrusu müze ziyaretçisinin önüne geliyor. Belki müzeoloji çalışmalarında bu label'ların ya da tekstlerin düzenlenmesinde direkt bilgiye yönelik değil de daha farklı sistemler geliştirerek hem bilginin hem de müze ziyaretçisinin o iletişiminin, sempatisinin ya da birbirleriyle daha yakın bir iletişim kurmasının sağlanması mümkün mü? Nasıl bakıyorlar buna? Yani bir yanda bilgi, bir yanda iletişim, bir yanda da müze ortamına gelen ziyaretçinin hem mutlu olması hem o sistem içerisinde daha özgür ve daha nasıl diyeyim, kendiyle olan iletişiminin sağlanması. Yani müze denince hep bilgi, hep obje, hep nesne odaklı gidiyoruz. Bunu nasıl sağlayacağız?
Tamam, hemen çeviriyorum.
Teşekkür ederim hocam.
She said that museum objects is document, but labels and all information given in the museums, how does it contact with the museum visitor? And that information, does it cover the wholeness and also the experience of the visitor in whole? Because last year, Museum Habitat, we have actually examined different museums in different sections of the world, including Far East and mostly European museums and American museums as well. So this is her question to you. So how do we convey this message to the visitor to let visitor to get a wholeness aside from the information, the museum experience of the visitor?
It's a great question. So I don't have a prescription because I think it's going to vary a lot. One of the things that I think is important in having the framework is, I don't know if I have a word for this, of a filtering effect. So by filtering, I mean that if we have intentional practitioners who take this framework and take what makes sense to them into each of the things they plan. So let's say they're planning an exhibition, or they're planning a program, or they're planning an outreach activity, that when they are doing these practices, the balancing, orienting, and inquiring, in the context of the framework, which part of that is, of course, wholeness and acknowledging the whole person, that what they end up with and what they do will end up speaking to, and I don't mean literally speaking to, but giving the visitor a whole person experience, if appropriate. They might not always be appropriate, because there might be very, very intellectual or very emotional things that need to sort of veer in that direction. But the fact that they have intentionally from the very start begun with this in mind, I think will show in an exhibition. So let's say in an exhibition, I can tell when I go into an exhibit when the consideration for body, mind, spirit is there. I can tell. I can tell an exhibition that is acknowledging or not acknowledging that, but is very focused on the intellectual. So I'll give you an example, a very simple example, and I use this all the time. So I don't know what I've already written elsewhere that you may have seen, but seating, benches, resting, very, very simple thing, but we are so bad at giving people comfort in museums. So a museum that has thought about that, I don't, as a visitor, I don't come in, I mean, I do because I'm, this is what I do for a living, but a visitor doesn't come in and go, oh, look at this museum is considering my whole person. They don't do that necessarily, but they're grateful because look, here's a place for me to sit down and oh, maybe this bench is an invitation to contemplate. So then we take it to spiritual. It also might have an effect, and I think it could have an effect if the institution, if it's an institutional value to be whole and about whole people and treat their workers as whole people, that those whole people then treat visitors as whole people. And I can give you an example of that. When I was at the Toledo Museum of Art, which is in Ohio, this is quite a long time ago now, but I have a current follow-up story that happened this last year. It's a typical museum, paintings on a wall with a tiny little label, gallery after gallery, lovely things, gorgeous, standing a lot. They do have a lot of seating though, so I love them for that. But I'm walking along, I go into a gallery, and I was alone. I go alone a lot because I enjoy that. And a guard pulls me over. A security guard pulls me over, and yeah, that's sort of scary, right? But the security guard said, come here. And he pulls a chair over and he sits it in front of a Rembrandt. And he says, this is my favorite painting. Just sit and look at it for a second. That is a guard who has been treated a certain way in his museum because there's clearly a value system that appreciates that. So now the guard translates to me that feeling. And it's a feeling of belonging. I don't care for Rembrandt, but I sat there and I looked at it and I remember this. That is 15 years ago. So I go in the other day, my daughter, pandemic, we're closed for so long. And my daughter, who is 21, comes home from college and says, I just need to go to a museum, Mom. Isn't that great? can we go to the Toledo Museum of Art? And I said, wow, I haven't been there in so long. Yeah, let's go. So the first gallery I walk in, a different guard walks up to the two of us and tells us what he thinks about 3 paintings in that gallery. And he said, look at that painting. Watch how the eyes follow you. He said, look, go walk back and forth. The eyes follow you. The guard was interacting with me and my daughter. And it just, I mean, I just get tingles about that kind of an experience. So that's what I mean by filter. It filters through. And this is why it's really hard to make a framework. It's really hard to like have a book. It's really hard to say, here's a how-to, because it really depends on how each person, each organization, and each system takes those values and makes them a part of their organization and how they treat people. And I think that's a really long answer to your question, but I'm hoping that helps answer how do we convey this message of wholeness to the visitor. It will take time, it takes intention, and it takes persistence. Yeah, an investment. I like that one too.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Any
Thank
other
you.
questions?
Yes. Can I ask?
Tamam, Ayşemciğim.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation. I would like to ask, impact is the life experience a person's confrontation with own past, and does the curiosity about the past really shape the future with the sense of optimism? And can you give an example of this if you think it shaped it? Thank you.
So the question you're asking if someone's curiosity about the past can shape the future.
Future, yes.
Definitely. Do I have an example is the question. Let me start talking and then maybe an example will come. I actually think, isn't that why we do what we do? Especially in things like art, history museums and what we call living history museums. I think that's the reason we do that. Okay, so I can think of an example. We have a small living history village and farm in Ohio. It's very small. And so it's a fairly typical kind of a setup where historical buildings have been taken from their original location and brought in and put into a design of a fake village or a fake scenario, an environment. And then there are people staffed in each of them to interpret, and they dressed up. They're not doing first person. They're not pretending like they're those people, but they're educating about how I might live in 1803 when I first came into the Great Black Swamp, which is where this location is, and what it was like for me to be in a Conestoga wagon. And so that's not very helpful for an 8th grader. For someone who's like 12 years old, that's not helpful. Oh, good, I can learn how to be in a Conestoga wagon. But it is, right? Because that interaction with the person who's doing the interpretation with the object, who's talking about the Conestoga wagon, then has the opportunity to stimulate their curiosity about thinking about it and how they might compare it to their life today and how it might affect what they're doing and how much harder life might have been, or maybe a different way in which it was hard, difficult. And maybe that 12-year-old, it gets them to think about something that they're really interested in making at home or doing at home, or some seed of a career that they're interested in. So I think like that's an example I have. Maybe it's not the best one, but I think that's why we do everything we do. And I would argue that every thing that's in a museum is actually sort of about the past, except for if you're having a current performance, right? A performance might be like right now, it's in the moment, but as soon as it's done, it's the past. So even art is the past, even contemporary art is the past because it was made, it's done. So I think you could, that statement is, it's a really great question, because I think it gets to why we do what we do. And I think that notion of curiosity, I think we need to make sure that we really continue to follow through with that. You know, we talk about curiosity cabinets and the curiosity of the past, and then we sort of overuse the word curiosity in some capacity, but that sense of wonder is, I think, is really critical for museum health, for visitor health, and for the health of society, frankly. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you.
Thank
Any other questions? Leycim, sormak ister misin bir soru? Okay.
You're absolutely welcome to write to me as well. Send me feedback or your thoughts. I'm sure you probably have access to my email or my blog, which sounds like you might. Yeah, please. I love to hear from people, and I don't mean in the context of necessarily supporting what it is that I'm doing, but if you have ideas and you can make connections for me as well and teach me.
Thank you, Kiersten. This was a great lecture, and on my behalf and my students and our visitors, thank you very much. And
My pleasure.
hope to read your book soon. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. This was very enjoyable. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Hoşça kalın.
Hoşçakalın hocam. Teşekkür ederiz.
Hocam
Olun
çok
hocam.
teşekkürler.
Hoşça kalın.
İnanılmaz bir enerji. Teşekkürler.
Teşekkürler hocam.
Just putting my email in the chat before I go.
Yeah,
Thank you. Yes.
thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.